Hello and welcome to the 7th episode of This Week in Mappercraft. This past week was February 8th to February 14th, and we'll be covering the years of 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. As always, all information here can be found on the Mappercraft wiki, which is linked in the description along with the server itself. Let's go over the years. In 2016, the server was running Earthworld Revived under Monsoon Jr. In 2017, the server was running Amplified World under Xenodyne. In 2018, the server was running Distorted Europe Revived under Xenodyne. In 2019, the server was running Solus World 1 under Solus. In 2020, the server was running Solus World 2, also under Solus. And in 2021, the server was running VMJ World Original under Multi. Lots of different stuff this week. First off, we have 4 events from February 8th to the 11th, halfway through the week, 2016, during Earthworld Revived. On the 9th, the Lapenian famine began due to severe damage from the previous 2 great wars that I talked about in previous episodes. They used their last carrots and bone meal in an attempt to avoid sort of massive starvation among their populace. Here's the quote for that. The famine would eventually end 2 days later on the 11th when a massive storeroom was found in a hidden house in Lapenia. Next up, on the 10th, we have the beginning of the Lapenia-Toba conflict when Miami was raided and Lapenia accused members of Toba of the crime. Here's the quote. The next day, Lapenia planned to declare an official war on Toba with support from the Golden Alliance, which I mentioned last week. Fortunately, the war ended that same day on the 11th with the Treaty of Algiers, where members of Toba had to help rebuild Lapenia and Persia, but the Golden Alliance and other signatories cannot declare war on Toba or attack them in other ways. However, before that happened, there was a unique event caused by this sort of conflict on the 11th. The supposed end of Donutian civilization occurred when one of the players, TL, wanted to declare support for Lapenia in their conflict, while Extra believed that Macoria, their nation, should help defend Toba. The 2 players had a brief civil war, and Extra won, so TL left and joined Lapenia, turning his back on this sort of quote-unquote Donutian culture over to the quote-unquote Herinian culture, Heranan culture. These 2 groups were formed based on the First Nations created on the server back in Panasia in 2015. And for most of the first couple of worlds, the 2 groups kind of explicitly competed against each other. The results of this caused both the results of this sort of end of Donutian civilization here caused both groups to declare that that culture had ended, with Extra reorganizing it into one called Macorian after their current nation. It was an interesting little clash across multiple worlds, but at this point it kind of started to come to an end. Here's the quote about it, and you can find out a little bit more about these groups on the wiki's cultures page, which I have linked in the description. The collapse of Donutian civilization also led to the aptly named beginning of the Haranan era, named after the remaining sort of successful culture. This brought an end to the Second Warring Era and ushered in a brief period of Haranan dominance, although not really peaceful dominance, for the next 2 weeks of the server. Here's the quote, which is minorly inaccurate, as obviously there were more sort of cultures on the server at the time, since, other people still lived there. Let's move on to the next couple of days, though, for 2016. We have 4 events from February 12th to the 14th of 2016, mostly on the 12th. First off, we have the Stravian Crusade, where Stravia decided that the Celtic Empire needed to give up its supposedly satanic religion. The crusade had minor success in southern England, but was quickly defeated when they traveled north into the Celtic capital of Eladon. The Celtic Empire received an ultimatum to convert by 6 p.m. Eastern Time, or be forced to by Halivian mercenaries. Here's the quote for that. However, that nation would refuse, and later that day, the War of Celtic Destruction occurred when the time for the ultimatum ran out and several nations responded by invading. After some intense fighting, the Celtic Empire finally collapsed when the nations of Sweden and Saturnia rebelled against their Celtic overlords. The remaining territory was split between the Garadhensi Caliphate and Lapenia. Here's the quote. After the war, the leader of the Celtic Empire agreed to a peace and became a citizen of Garahensi. However, tensions would remain as the Havana crisis occurred shortly after, when the former leader, whose name was General Garanthax, would be discovered griefing Havana in Lepania. At first, the general denied any wrongdoing, but soon admitted it to Creator, who attempted to defend him to the international community. This almost spilled out into a major conflict, as the Golden Alliance basically threatened to attack Creator personally if they didn't stop defending sort of people grieving. Ultimately, actual fighting was averted, as seen in the quote. And for the last event, we have a minor but pretty impactful event when, on the 13th of February 2016, the Republic of Allegheny was founded by Sikorsky. This republic would eventually go on to help found the PAU and took over from Lepania as the major power in the Americas. We'll definitely be seeing more of this nation as the year continues. But that does bring us to a close of the week in 2016. And here's the quote for that one. And next up, we have 3 events from the 8th to the 14th of 2017 during Amplified World, which opened on the 11th. This was a world which was naturally generated, but with the amplified biomes modifier. Here's the super limited quote to describe that. During the opening of the world, obviously, several different nations were founded, including Rachonia, the Cringedom of Baby Penguins by Finn Mapper, the Kingdom of Seaguard by Creator, and Orangestad by Shining Orange. Here's the quote for all of those. Also, on the first day after all those nations were founded, Rachonia was forced to break up because they had too many players and staff didn't want them to dominate the world from the outset. This nation split into 3 different factions: Volcrium, which had Tomad, Thentacle, and Lolistan as members; Valkyria, which had Scully, Multi, Mitch, and Flaming; and Pibopolis, which had Bonito Pib and Mac for Life. Here's the quote for that. So obviously, it makes sense that someone would come in and tell them they have to break up, but at the same time, it's kind of staff intervening in a way that we don't really do anymore. Eventually, those nations would be allowed to reform Rachonia, but that will happen obviously at a later date. For 2018, we only have one event on the 10th of February during Distorted Europe, pretty minor. It was when several nations were disbanded for inactivity, presumably for their inactivity. These include Persia, Razumia, and the Republic of Muscat, all nations on the sort of periphery of that world. Here's the quote. Not much for this world this week, but I figured I would give it a shout out. Similarly, we have one event for this week in 2019 during Solus World 1, when on the 10th, Latvia was formed. Solus World 1 is missing a lot of info, so I don't really have much for a quote here, but we should be able to do a couple of different events in the coming weeks, even if nobody adds more to that wiki page. Next up, we have 2 related events from Solus World 2 in 2020. First, on the 10th, Kursk was founded. Cambrian, a player, was formerly king of Italy before abdicating to settle in South America as Kursk. That nation, Kursk, would be pretty impactful early on during Solus World 2, so we'll definitely be hearing more about them as things go on, but I'm not going to spoil it. Here's the quote for that formation. The remaining players in Italy reformed the nation into the Duchy of Rubicon as a vassal of Kursk, so the king of Italy, Cambrian, retains kind of effective leadership of the area, and the 2 nations remained closely connected. Here's the quote. Finally, the last world, we have 4 events here from February 8th to the 14th, 2021, during the original VMJ world. We've actually reused that map for our current world that's up right now, so you can hop onto the server to check out some of the sort of locations listed here if you'd like. First, on the 9th, Rome began to collapse after staff forces the nation to heavily reduce their claim due to the inactivity of the majority of their players. Due to this, many Roman governors and other local leaders chose to sort of declare independence, and Rome sort of officially started their collapse. Fighting broke out when the French National Republic tried to secede, and General Pusillanimous declared war on behalf of the Roman Senate to prevent this. Doggerland, another rebellious state, allied with France, and the 2 nations eventually combined into Angevin to prosecute the war. The conflict quickly collapsed into sort of random griefing, especially of the former nation of Holland, which was sort of the capital of Rome, and Nixie was crowned as the new Roman emperor for a short period of time when New Amsterdam was occupied. Eventually, General Pusillanimous declared independence as a member of Holland, removing any lingering resistance to the various independence movements. Here's the quote. Many of the active citizens of the nation fled the conflict, joining much more stable and active nations such as Beijing. Of particular note is the founding of Fuzhen on the 11th by former General Ptolemus after returning Holand to its owner Java C. He joined Beijing and formed this city, which remains active to this day to today. Here's the quote with the establishment date of the 11th. Also on the 11th, the final collapse of Rome occurred when they disbanded following the ending of the Civil War. Angevin greatly increased in size as a result of their victory, and several other nations reformed themselves from the ashes of the once great nation. Additionally, Beijing gained a colony in the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia, which was originally owned by the nation of Indonesia before they were destroyed in the coalition wars in November of last year. From there, the island was occupied by the Netherlands, and it transferred to Rome when that was created. The island remains in the possession of Daitan Daijing to this day on the current iteration of the server. Here's the quote. The final event for the week is a little looser, but it did occur on the 14th when Beijing saw a period of rapid expansion due to Roman refugees flooding into the nation, as well as the annexation of the Duchy of Kangzhou and the previously mentioned acquisition of Sulawesi. Additionally, the removal of Rome helped catapult Beijing into a prominent position in international politics, ultimately becoming the strongest nation by the end of the world in May. Here's the quote for that. And this marks the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and check out the server at the link in the description. As always, if you have any additional information about any of these events, leave a comment down below or go ahead and add it to the Mappercraft wiki. See you next week for February 15th through the 21st.